the heart of Houston's Third Ward, where tree-lined streets meet million-dollar homes. A kitchen tells a story no one wants to believe. Blood spatters paint the granite countertops like abstract art. Shattered wedding photos lie scattered across Italian tile floors, their glass catching the morning light. The breakfast bar where Khalil and Simone Washington shared coffee just 2 days before now holds a different kind of evidence. A torn piece of fabric, emerald green silk from Simone's favorite dress, hangs from the edge of a toppled chair. The refrigerator door stands open, condiments and juice bottles forming a trail toward the back door. Detective Maria Santos steps carefully around the chaos, her camera clicking steadily. 23 years on the force, and she's seen domestic violence scenes before. But this one feels different. Too much blood for the amount of damage. Too perfectly staged for a crime of passion. The wedding photos draw her attention. Not just broken by accident during a struggle. Someone took time to tear them. Khalil's face carefully removed from every single frame, while Simone's remained untouched. Who destroys evidence with such precision during a fight for their life? In the master bedroom upstairs, more questions emerge. Simone's jewelry box sits undisturbed on the dresser, her wedding ring still inside, but her passport missing from the nightstand drawer where neighbors say she always kept it. Her suitcase gone from the closet, but all her favorite shoes left behind. The blood evidence tells a violent story. Enough to suggest serious injury, maybe death. The pattern suggests someone was struck near the kitchen island, then dragged toward the garage. But here's what doesn't make sense. No fingerprints in the blood. No hair. No skin under anyone's fingernails. Khalil Washington returned from his business trip to Dallas that Tuesday morning to find police cars lining his driveway. His wife of 4 years had vanished. The only trace of Simone left behind was the blood painting their dream kitchen red. But in missing person cases, the husband is always the first suspect. And Khalil's story had holes. His hotel key card showed he left his room Monday night, hours before his wife's estimated disappearance. His rental car had extra miles. His alibi depended on a conference dinner he claimed to attend, but security footage never showed him entering the restaurant. Within 48 hours, Khalil Washington was sitting in an interrogation room, his hands shaking as Detective Santos slid crime scene photos across the metal table. "Where's your wife, Mr. Washington?" The question that would haunt him for the next 15 years. Because here's what investigators believed happened that Monday night. Khalil drove back from Dallas in a rage. Maybe he found out about the pregnancy Simone had just announced. Maybe he discovered something else. Either way, when neighbors heard shouting around midnight, it was the last time anyone would see Simone Washington alive. The search for her body would span 3 counties. Divers combed the murky waters of Buffalo Bayou. Cadaver dogs sniffed through every abandoned warehouse in East Houston. Ground-penetrating radar scanned empty lots across Harris County. But Simone Washington had vanished like smoke. What no one knew, what nobody could imagine, was that while search teams dragged the San Jacinto River looking for her remains, Simone Washington was very much alive, sitting on a plane bound for South America, watching Houston's lights disappear below the clouds. The truth would stay buried for 15 years, until one afternoon, when a free man named Khalil Washington picked up a borrowed phone and saw something that stopped his heart cold. A face he'd mourned for over a decade, laughing on a beach thousands of miles away. This isn't just a story about a missing woman. This is about the lies we tell ourselves about love, about the prices we pay for other people's secrets, and about what happens when the dead refuse to stay buried. You're watching Crime Next Door. I'm your host, and this story will leave you questioning everything you think you know about justice. Before we dive into this incredible story, if you're new here, consider hitting that subscribe button. We bring you cases like this one every week. Stories that go beyond the headlines to explore the complex human emotions behind shocking crimes. And if you find yourself hooked by what unfolds here today, a quick tap on that like button helps us continue investigating these fascinating cases. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this one, because what happened between Khalil and Simone will challenge everything you think you know about love, betrayal, and justice. To understand how we got to that blood-soaked kitchen, we need to go back 3 years. back when Khalil and Simone Washington were the couple everyone envied in their Third Ward neighborhood. He was 25. She was 23, and they looked like they had it all figured out. Khalil worked as an IT specialist for Marathon Oil, pulling in $70,000 a year. Steady job, steady man. The type who remembered anniversaries and never forgot to fill up her gas tank. His coworkers called him quiet, reliable. The guy who stayed late to help others with their computer problems without being asked. Simone Washington was everything Khalil wasn't. Where he was reserved, she was magnetic. Where he preferred quiet nights at home, she thrived in crowds. As an event planner for Houston's elite, she moved through the city's social circles like she belonged there. Charity galas, corporate parties, wedding receptions for oil executives and their daughters. They lived in a modest two-story home on Cleburne Street. Nothing fancy by River Oaks standards, but comfortable. A place where they could raise the family they both said they wanted. Khalil had already converted the spare bedroom into a nursery twice. 2 miscarriages in 2 years had left them both heartbroken, but hopeful. Friends described them as devoted to each other. Khalil would drive across town during his lunch break just to bring Simone soup when she was sick. She would surprise him at work with his favorite barbecue from Gatlin's. To their neighbors, they were the young black couple making it work despite the odds. But here's what those same neighbors didn't see. The late-night phone call Simone took on the back patio. The way she started working weekend events more often, coming home at 3 in the morning with stories about difficult clients and overtime pay. The new clothes that seemed too expensive for an event planner's salary. Khalil noticed, but he trusted his wife. When she said she was networking with potential clients, he believed her. When she explained the designer handbag as a gift from a grateful bride's family, he never questioned it. Love makes smart people blind, and Khalil Washington was very much in love. What he didn't know was that Simone had reconnected with someone from her past. Someone who made her feel like the woman she used to be before marriage and mortgage payments and trying to get pregnant. Someone whose name she hadn't spoken aloud in 4 years. Jermaine Baptiste. Rome to everyone who knew him. Simone's college boyfriend from Prairie View A&M. The one her mother never liked, the one her friends said was trouble. The one she'd chosen Khalil over because he represented security. Rome had moved to Miami after graduation, chasing music production dreams and fast money. But in December, 3 months before Simone's disappearance, Rome came back to Houston. Not the broke college kid anymore. Now he wore custom suits and drove a Range Rover with Florida plates. He'd made his money in import business. He told people, the kind of import business where you don't ask too many questions about the details. They ran into each other at the Galleria. Simone was there for a client meeting at the Westin. Rome was shopping for his mother's birthday. 1 coffee turned into 2 hours of catching up. 2 hours turned into text messages. Text messages turned into secret meetings. Within weeks, Simone was living 2 lives. During the day, she was Mrs. Washington, planning charity events and Sunday dinners. At night, she was the woman Rome remembered from college. Wild, spontaneous, alive in ways that 4 years of marriage had slowly buried. She told herself it was just excitement, just feeling desired again, just remembering who she used to be before she became someone's wife. She wasn't planning to leave Khalil. She loved Khalil, but Rome made her feel like herself again. Then came the pregnancy test in February. 2 pink lines that changed everything. The timing made it impossible to know for certain, but in her heart, Simone knew. This wasn't Khalil's baby. This was the child she'd made with a man who represented everything her safe, stable life wasn't. She had 3 choices. Tell Khalil the truth and destroy 2 lives. Terminate the pregnancy and live with the secret forever. Or find a way to disappear with Rome and start over somewhere else. Somewhere no one knew their names or their history. The choice she made would cost an innocent man 15 years of his life. And it would eventually cost her everything. But to understand why Simone made the decision she did, you need to know who these people really were. Not the versions their neighbors saw. Not the image they presented to the world. But who they were when no one was watching. Khalil Washington grew up in Sunnyside, raised by his grandmother after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12. Miss Ruby Washington taught him that a man's word was his bond, and that hard work could overcome any obstacle. She died the year before he met Simone, but her lessons lived in everything he did. At Marathon Oil, Khalil was the guy everyone could count on. When the servers crashed at 2 in the morning, he was the one they called. When new employees needed training, they sent them to Khalil. He made $42 an hour fixing problems other people created, and he never complained about the overtime. His co-workers knew him as the man who ate lunch alone while reading technical manuals, who kept a photo of his wife on his desk and called her every day at exactly noon, who never joined the Friday happy hours because he preferred to go home to Simone. Simone Ellis, before she became Simone Washington, was different. She grew up in Missouri City with parents who expected perfection. Her father was a bank manager, her mother a high school principal. Good grades, good college, good marriage. The plan was always to find stability and respectability. Khalil represented everything her parents wanted for her: educated, employed, and devoted. When he proposed after 18 months of dating, she said yes because it made sense, because he was safe, because he would never hurt her or leave her or make her question her worth. But being safe isn't the same as being happy. And by their 3rd year of marriage, Simone felt like she was disappearing a little more each day. The woman who used to dance until sunrise was now asleep by 10. The woman who used to take weekend trips to New Orleans was now planning other people's adventures. She loved Khalil, but she wasn't in love with him anymore. Maybe she never had been. Maybe she'd mistaken gratitude for love, security for passion. Either way, the realization was eating her alive. Then Rome walked back into her life at the worst possible moment, when she was already questioning everything about her marriage, her future, her identity. Rome, who remembered the woman she used to be. Rome, who made her laugh like she hadn't laughed in years. Their affair started innocently enough. Coffee meetings that turned into lunch dates that turned into afternoon drives that turned into hotel rooms, and promises to leave their past behind and build something new together. Rome had connections in Colombia through his import business, people who could provide new identities, new papers, new lives for the right price. He painted a picture of beaches and freedom, and a place where nobody knew their names or their history. But leaving meant abandoning everything. Khalil, who'd done nothing wrong except love her completely. Her career, which she'd built from nothing. Her family, who would never understand. And it meant destroying Khalil in the process. Because Rome's plan wasn't just about disappearing. It was about making sure no one would look for them. And the best way to do that was to make people believe Simone was already dead. To make Khalil look like a killer. To create a crime scene so convincing that no one would question the story. When Simone took that pregnancy test in February, she knew she was carrying Rome's child. The timing lined up perfectly with their first night together. But she also knew that Khalil would believe the baby was his. They'd been trying for so long, he would be overjoyed. She could have told him the truth, could have asked for a divorce, could have walked away without destroying his life. But Rome convinced her that a clean break wasn't possible, that Khalil would fight for custody, would make things complicated, would never let her go. So they planned something else, something that would give them their freedom and ensure that no one would ever come looking for them, something that required Khalil to pay the price for their happiness. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Stage Simone's murder, plant evidence pointing to Khalil, disappear while he sat in prison for a crime that never happened. Let him take the blame while they raised their child in paradise. What they didn't count on was how long Khalil would survive in prison, how many appeals he would file, how many people would eventually question the evidence, how many years would pass before the truth started to surface. Because 15 years later, when Khalil Washington walked out of prison a free man, he carried with him something more dangerous than anger. He carried the patience of a man who'd learned to wait, the determination of someone who'd lost everything, and the cold clarity that comes from having nothing left to lose. The plan they executed that March night was months in the making. Every detail calculated, every piece of evidence carefully placed. Simone had studied enough crime scenes through her work with law enforcement charity events to know what investigators would look for. It started with the argument. Monday night, March 15th. Simone waited until Khalil was safely in Dallas for his company conference. Then she called her neighbor, Mrs. Chun, at exactly 11:45. She made sure her voice was shaky, frightened. She said Khalil had come home early, that he was angry about something, that she was scared. Mrs. Chun heard, shouting through the thin walls, a woman's voice pleading, a man's voice angry and threatening. She heard what sounded like furniture being thrown, glass breaking, someone crying. What she didn't know was that Simone was alone in the house, playing both parts of the fight. The audio came from recordings Rome had made weeks earlier. His voice, altered through a cheap voice modifier app, played through speakers, while Simone provided her own screams and pleas for help. They'd practiced the timing dozens of times until it sounded real. While the fake argument played for the neighbors, Simone worked quickly. She overturned chairs, shattered their wedding photos, scattered her jewelry across the bedroom floor. She used a kitchen knife to slash her own clothing, careful to avoid actual injury, but creating the appearance of a struggle. The blood came from a pig Rome had purchased from a butcher shop in southwest Houston. They'd stored it in a cooler for 3 days, letting it congeal to the right consistency. Simone spread it across the kitchen counters, the floor, the walls, enough to suggest serious injury without so much that it looked fake. But the most important piece of evidence was hidden in the garage. Khalil's favorite shirt, the one with his name embroidered on the chest pocket, the one his grandmother had given him for Christmas. Simone soaked it in pig's blood and stuffed it behind a box of holiday decorations, where police would eventually find it. She left traces of her own DNA mixed with the blood, hair she'd collected from her brush over several weeks, saliva on a broken glass, skin cells under her own fingernails that she'd scraped off deliberately. Everything investigators would expect to find at a real crime scene. The hardest part was the personal touches. The wedding ring she bent with a hammer before dropping it in the sink. The family photos she tore apart, making sure to remove only Khalil's face. The love letters she'd written to herself in Khalil's handwriting, then destroyed, leaving just enough fragments for police to piece together what looked like threats. By 2 in the morning, the scene was set. Simone packed a single bag with clothes, cash, and the fake Colombian passport Rome had arranged through his connections. Maria Santos, 26 years old, born in Bogota, the identity she would wear for the next 15 years. Rome picked her up 3 blocks away from the house. By sunrise, they were at Bush Intercontinental Airport, boarding separate flights to different cities. The plan was to meet in Cartagena 3 days later, after the initial investigation had begun and police focus had shifted to finding Khalil. Meanwhile, Khalil was 200 miles away in Dallas, attending a petroleum technology conference. He gave a presentation on network security Tuesday morning, had lunch with colleagues, attended afternoon seminars. His conference badge was scanned every time he entered a session. His hotel key card showed him returning to his room each night. But there was a problem with his alibi that Simone had counted on. Monday night, after the opening dinner, Khalil had returned to his room early with a headache. No one saw him between 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. No room service orders, no phone calls, no credit card charges. Just a man alone in a hotel room with no witnesses. When Khalil's phone started ringing Tuesday morning with calls from unknown numbers, he assumed it was spam. When the calls kept coming, he finally answered. Detective Santos on the other end, asking him to come home immediately. There had been an incident involving his wife. The drive from Dallas to Houston normally took 4 hours. Khalil made it in 3, speeding through East Texas backroads with his heart in his throat. He called Simone's phone dozens of times, straight to voicemail. He called her office, her friends, her mother. No one had heard from her since Monday afternoon. He arrived home to find his street blocked with police cars and crime scene tape. His front door sealed, investigators in white suits photographing every inch of his house. Detective Santos met him at the curb with questions that made no sense. Where had he been Monday night? Could anyone verify his whereabouts? Had he and his wife been having problems? Was he aware that neighbors had reported a domestic disturbance? Did he know his wife was pregnant? The pregnancy announcement hit him like a physical blow. Simone was carrying their child, the baby they'd been trying for, and now she was missing. He demanded to see the house, to help search for her, to do something besides stand on the sidewalk answering questions. That's when Detective Santos showed him the first crime scene photo. His kitchen painted red, with what looked like his wife's blood. And that's when Khalil Washington's life as a free man ended, even though it would take another 48 hours for the handcuffs to finally close around his wrists. Detective Maria Santos had worked homicide for 8 years when the Simone Washington case landed on her desk. She'd seen domestic violence murders before, knew the patterns, knew the signs. But something about this case felt wrong from the beginning. The blood spatter analysis came back inconclusive. Too much blood for a beating, not enough for a fatal stabbing. The pattern suggested blunt force trauma, but no murder weapon was found despite searching every inch of the house and surrounding area. Then there was the missing body. In domestic murders, perpetrators usually made poor decisions about disposal. They buried victims in shallow graves, dumped them in familiar locations, left evidence trails that led straight back to them. But Simone Washington had vanished completely. The first break came when Officer Rodriguez found Khalil's shirt in the garage, hidden behind Christmas decorations, soaked in what appeared to be Simone's blood. The shirt had Khalil's initials embroidered on the pocket, a detail that seemed almost too convenient. But the blood told a different story than the one Khalil was telling. DNA analysis confirmed it was Simone's blood, but something bothered the lab technician. The coagulation pattern was inconsistent with fresh blood. It looked older, like it had been stored before being applied to the fabric. Detective Santos requested additional testing, but the lab was backlogged for months. The district attorney's office was pressuring for an arrest. The media had picked up the story of the missing pregnant woman and her husband with a convenient alibi that no one could verify. Khalil's interview tapes revealed a man either genuinely confused or expertly coached. He answered every question directly, never asked for a lawyer, submitted to polygraph tests and DNA sampling without hesitation. His story never changed, even under hours of interrogation. Khalil's phone records showed no calls or texts during the missing hours. His credit card showed no purchases. His E-ZPass showed no toll road usage. For a man who usually documented every aspect of his life, the digital silence was deafening. But Detective Santos found other evidence that troubled her. Simone's laptop showed extensive internet searches about domestic violence shelters, divorce attorneys, and starting over in different states, all conducted during the 2 weeks before her disappearance. Either Simone was planning to leave, or someone wanted it to look that way. The searches were done late at night, when Khalil was typically asleep, using a private browser that wouldn't save history. But the timestamps showed the searches happening while Khalil was logged into his work computer from home, making it unlikely he was the one conducting them. There were also financial irregularities. Simone had withdrawn $15,000 from their joint savings account over 3 months, taking small amounts that wouldn't trigger bank alerts. When asked about the withdrawals, Khalil seemed genuinely surprised. He trusted Simone to handle their finances and never monitored the accounts closely. The pregnancy added another layer of complexity. Medical records showed Simone was 8 weeks pregnant at the time of her disappearance, but her doctor's notes indicated she'd seemed anxious during her last appointment, asking unusual questions about paternity testing and whether pregnancy could be detected before missed periods. Khalil's reaction to the pregnancy news during his interrogation seemed authentic. Joy followed by confusion, followed by devastation as he realized he might never meet his child. Either he was an exceptional actor, or he genuinely hadn't known about the pregnancy before police told him. The neighbor interviews painted conflicting pictures. Mrs. Chin confirmed hearing the argument Monday night, but her description of the voices didn't quite match. She said the man's voice sounded different, deeper than Khalil's usual tone. Other neighbors described Simone as increasingly secretive in recent months, taking phone calls in her car and receiving deliveries when Khalil wasn't home. Most damaging was the testimony from Simone's co-worker, Jennifer Martinez. She claimed Simone had confided about problems in her marriage, said Khalil was becoming controlling and jealous. But when pressed for specifics, Jennifer's story seemed rehearsed, like she was reciting lines someone had taught her. Detective Santos discovered that Jennifer had recently paid off her student loans despite working an entry-level position. When questioned about the sudden financial windfall, Jennifer claimed it was an inheritance from a great-aunt no one could verify existed. The physical evidence kept pointing toward Khalil, but the circumstantial evidence suggested a more complex story. Someone had planned his disappearance carefully, anticipated police procedures, knew exactly what evidence to plant and what to remove. 3 weeks into the investigation, Khalil Washington was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The district attorney called it a slam-dunk case. Detective Santos filed her report with a notation that the investigation should remain open pending discovery of the victim's body. She would spend the next 15 years wondering if she'd helped convict an innocent man or if she'd simply been outmaneuvered by a killer smart enough to cover his tracks. The truth wouldn't surface until long after both their lives had been irreversibly changed. The Eastham unit in East Texas became Khalil Washington's home for the next 15 years. Maximum security, concrete walls, and a cell barely large enough for a grown man to stretch his arms. He was 28 when the steel doors closed behind him. He would be 43 when they opened again. The first year nearly broke him. Khalil had never been in a fight, never raised his voice in anger, never even gotten a speeding ticket. Prison was a foreign world with rules he didn't understand and consequences that could turn deadly in seconds. He was labeled a wife killer, which put a target on his back from day one. Inmates had their own code of justice, and men who hurt women didn't rank high in the hierarchy. 3 different prisoners tried to stab him during his first 6 months. He learned to sleep with one eye open and never turn his back in the yard. But Khalil had something most prisoners didn't: education. Within his first year, he was helping other inmates write letters to their families, fill out appeals paperwork, understand legal documents their court-appointed attorneys had filed. Word spread that Cell Block C had someone who could read the law. By his 3rd year, Khalil had become the unofficial legal advisor for half the prison. He spent his commissary money on law books, studied case precedents, learned the appeals process better than some attorneys. He filed motion after motion, appeal after appeal, challenging every aspect of his conviction. The first appeals were denied. Insufficient evidence of misconduct. No new evidence presented. No constitutional violations found. The system that had failed him once continued to fail him systematically, methodically, year after year. But Khalil never stopped learning. He earned his GED, then a bachelor's degree through correspondence courses, then a paralegal certificate. He became the inmate other prisoners came to when the system failed them too. He helped men who couldn't read understand their sentences, taught others how to file grievances when guards violated their rights. His grandmother, Miss Ruby's sister Dolores, visited him every month for the first 5 years. She brought home-cooked food when the rules allowed, pictures of family gatherings he couldn't attend, news from the neighborhood he'd left behind. She never stopped believing in his innocence, never stopped telling him to keep fighting. But age caught up with Aunt Dolores during his 6th year. Cancer, diagnosed too late, spread too fast. Khalil wasn't allowed to attend her funeral. He sat in his cell that day, staring at the concrete wall, realizing he was truly alone in the world for the first time. That's when he met Marcus Thompson, a lifer who'd been inside for 23 years on an armed robbery conviction. Marcus had watched hundreds of men come and go, seen some find redemption and others lose their minds. He took Khalil under his wing during the darkest period of his incarceration. Marcus taught him prison survival, but more importantly, he taught him patience, how to wait for opportunities, how to plan for the long term, how to keep hope alive when everything seemed hopeless. Marcus had been fighting his own case for 2 decades, filing appeals that went nowhere, but he never gave up. Through Marcus, Khalil learned about the Innocence Project, about other cases where DNA evidence had overturned wrongful convictions, about the slow but steady progress being made in criminal justice reform. He started writing letters to law schools, journalism programs, anyone who might take an interest in his case. Most of his letters went unanswered, but in his 9th year, a law student named Sarah Chun at the University of Houston took interest in his case. She was writing her thesis on prosecutorial misconduct and needed examples of potentially wrongful convictions. Sarah spent months reviewing Khalil's case files, interviewing witnesses, examining evidence that had been stored in police warehouses for nearly a decade. She found discrepancies in the blood evidence that had never been properly investigated, questions about chain of custody that had never been answered. But Sarah's research hit a wall when key evidence went missing from police storage. The blood-soaked shirt that had been central to Khalil's conviction had been destroyed in what officials called a routine evidence disposal. The lab reports that had raised questions about blood coagulation patterns had been lost in a computer system upgrade. Still, Sarah published her thesis highlighting irregularities in several Harris County murder cases, including Khalil's. The paper was noticed by a defense attorney named David Ramos, who specialized in wrongful conviction cases. But Ramos's investigation stalled when Detective Santos retired and refused to discuss the case. By his 12th year, Khalil had stopped expecting rescue from outside sources. He focused on helping other inmates, teaching literacy classes, running conflict resolution workshops. He became a stabilizing force in a violent environment, someone both guards and prisoners respected. But he never stopped filing appeals. Every year brought new motions, new arguments, new attempts to get someone in authority to take a second look at his case. The rejections became routine, form letters that arrived with crushing regularity. Then, in his 14th year, everything changed. A scandal broke involving the Houston Police Department's crime lab. Hundreds of cases were being reviewed after evidence emerged of contaminated DNA samples, falsified test results, and evidence tampering dating back over 2 decades. Khalil's case was included in the review because of the blood evidence questions Sarah Chun had raised years earlier. New DNA testing revealed something shocking. The blood on his shirt wasn't just Simone's. It contained traces of an anticoagulant used in medical blood storage, proving the blood had been preserved before being applied to the fabric. More damning was the discovery of unidentified DNA on the shirt, male DNA that didn't match Khalil. Someone else had handled that evidence, someone whose DNA wasn't in any law enforcement database. The Harris County District Attorney's Office faced a choice: fight the new evidence and risk exposing the broader lab scandal, or quietly overturn Khalil's conviction and hope the story didn't gain national attention. Khalil Washington walked out of prison on a Tuesday morning in October, 15 years after walking in. No apology, no compensation. Just a paper bag with his belongings and a bus ticket back to Houston. The world he returned to was unrecognizable. Smartphones, social media, a city that had grown and changed while he stood still. But Khalil had changed too. Prison had hardened him, focused him, taught him lessons about patience and planning that no university could provide. He was no longer the trusting young man who'd believed the system would protect the innocent. He was something else now, something more dangerous. Because while Khalil Washington had spent 15 years in a concrete cage, the woman who put him there had been living free, raising a child that should have been his, building a life on the foundation of his destroyed one. And now, for the first time since that bloody kitchen scene, they would be breathing the same air again. October 15th, 2023. The same month Simone had disappeared 15 years earlier. Khalil Washington walked through the gates of Eastham Unit, carrying everything he owned in a brown paper bag. One change of clothes, $47 in commissary money, and a bus ticket to Houston. The world that greeted him was foreign. Everyone stared at screens in their hands. Cars drove themselves down highways. Buildings had risen where empty lots used to be. Houston had exploded outward and upward while he'd been frozen in time. The state gave him nothing beyond that bus ticket. No job placement, no housing assistance, no counseling for 15 years of trauma. Just freedom wrapped in bureaucracy and the assumption that he should be grateful for the chance to start over at 43. His first stop was the Harris County Clerk's office. He needed a new Social Security card, a state ID, proof that he existed in a world that had moved on without him. The clerk, a young woman who couldn't have been older than 20, looked at his paperwork with confusion. "Your last known address is from 2008, she said. "Your employment history shows a 15-year gap." She didn't ask why. The conviction overturned paperwork told that story clearly enough. She processed his forms with the efficiency of someone who'd seen too many similar cases. Khalil spent his first night of freedom in a Salvation Army shelter on Fannin Street. Men with addiction problems, mental health issues, and stories of bad luck that had landed them on the streets. He lay on a thin mattress listening to strangers snore and wondered if this was what freedom was supposed to feel like. The next morning, he started looking for work. His computer skills were 15 years out of date. His references were all dead or had moved on. His prison record, even though overturned, still showed up in background checks. Most employers saw the gap in his employment history and found reasons not to hire him. After 2 weeks of rejections, he found work at a small computer repair shop in Montrose. The owner, Miguel Santos, was Detective Santos's younger brother. Miguel had followed Khalil's case in the news, knew about the overturned conviction, and believed in second chances. The pay was minimum wage, but it was honest work. Khalil spent his days fixing laptops and smartphones, learning about technology that had advanced dramatically during his incarceration. Miguel was patient, teaching him about cloud storage, social media, apps that didn't exist when he went to prison. Khalil found a studio apartment 6 blocks from the shop. 400 square feet, no air conditioning, windows that faced a brick wall. But it was his. No cellmate, no guards, no schedule imposed by someone else. He could eat when he wanted, sleep when he chose, leave the lights on all night if it pleased him. But freedom came with its own prison. The outside world felt overwhelming after 15 years of routine and restriction. He jumped at sudden noises, felt claustrophobic in crowds, couldn't sleep without checking the locks on his door multiple times. The nightmares were worse than prison had been. Dreams where he was back in the cell, where the appeals had been denied, where he died behind bars, never knowing the truth about what happened to Simone. He would wake up gasping, heart racing, needing several minutes to remember where he was. 3 months after his release, Khalil received a call from David Ramos, the attorney who had worked on his case. The state was offering a settlement for wrongful imprisonment, $250,000 for 15 years of his life, less than $17,000 per year. Ramos advised him to take it. The money gave him options. He could leave Houston, start fresh somewhere else, try to rebuild a normal life. But Khalil wasn't ready to move on. He had questions that needed answers. 15 years of questions that had eaten at him every night in his cell. He used part of the settlement money to hire a private investigator named Jerome Banks. Jerome specialized in cold cases, missing persons, and situations where the official investigation had missed something important. Khalil gave him one task: find out what really happened to Simone Washington. Banks' investigation started with the original case files, but quickly expanded into areas the police had never explored. Simone's phone records from before her disappearance showed calls to numbers that were no longer in service. Her email account had been deleted within hours of her reported death. Banks's first report arrived in a manila envelope 3 weeks later. Mirabel Santiago, married to Roman Bautista, living in Cartagena, Colombia. The photos showed a woman who looked like Simone but older, confident, comfortable. She had a teenage daughter named Amara, who attended an expensive international school. The family ran an import-export business that brought in 6 figures annually. They lived in a gated community overlooking the Caribbean, drove luxury cars, took vacations to Europe. While Khalil had eaten prison food and slept on a concrete slab, Simone had been living like royalty. But Banks's investigation revealed something else. Roman Bautista wasn't just any businessman. His name appeared in Colombian financial records dating back 20 years. He'd been arrested twice for money laundering but never convicted. His business connections included people the DEA had been watching for decades. The timeline matched perfectly. Rome had left Houston around the same time Simone disappeared, supposedly to expand his Miami operations. But he'd actually moved to Colombia, where he'd waited for Simone to join him with their carefully planned new identities. Banks discovered that the import-export business was registered just 6 months after Simone's arrival in Colombia. The initial investment had been exactly $200,000, the same amount that had gone missing from various Houston area banks through identity theft schemes around the time of Simone's disappearance. More disturbing was what Banks found about their daughter Amara. Birth records showed she was born exactly 9 months after Simone entered Colombia. The timeline made it impossible for Khalil to be the father, which meant everything Simone had told him about the pregnancy was a lie. Khalil stared at the photos of Amara for hours. She had Rome's eyes, Simone's smile, and the life that should have belonged to his child. The family he dreamed of building had been real, just not with him. Banks's final report included detailed schedules of the family's routine. Amara's school schedule, Simone's weekly activities, Rome's business meetings. The investigator had been thorough, mapping out 2 months of patterns that showed when each family member would be alone and vulnerable. But Banks had also included a warning. Roman Bautista had connections to dangerous people. If Khalil was planning any kind of confrontation, he needed to understand that Rome had resources and relationships that could make problems disappear permanently. Khalil ignored the warning. He used part of his settlement money to obtain a passport, something he'd never needed during his simple life before prison. The process took 6 weeks, long enough for him to plan every detail of what he would do once he reached Colombia. He studied Spanish language apps for hours each day, learning enough to navigate basic conversations. He researched Colombian law, customs procedures, safe neighborhoods, and areas to avoid. He wanted no surprises when he arrived in Cartagena. The hardest part was deciding what he wanted from Simone when he found her. Revenge felt too simple, too crude for 15 years of planning. Justice seemed impossible, since no Colombian court would care about American crimes. But answers, the truth, an admission of what she'd done to him, that felt achievable. Khalil bought a small digital recorder, the kind lawyers used for depositions. If Simone confessed to framing him, if she admitted to stealing his life, he wanted proof. Something he could take back to Houston, something that would clear his name completely and expose what she'd done. He also bought a prepaid phone with international service and created fake social media accounts under the name Eric Daniels. The accounts showed a tourist planning a vacation to Colombia, someone interested in local restaurants and cultural sites. Nothing that would raise suspicion if anyone checked. 3 days before his planned departure, Khalil received another call from David Ramos. The attorney had heard rumors that Khalil was planning to travel internationally and wanted to warn him about the conditions of his settlement agreement. Any criminal activity, even outside the United States, could void the settlement and potentially lead to federal charges. Ramos reminded him that he was still technically on supervised release and needed permission to leave the country for extended periods. Khalil lied smoothly, telling Ramos he was taking a short vacation to process his trauma and would be back within 2 weeks. He filed the proper paperwork with his parole officer, listing his destination as a resort in Cancun and providing a fake hotel confirmation. The night before his flight, Khalil sat in his small apartment looking at the photos Banks had provided. 15 years of wondering what had happened to his wife. 15 years of grief and guilt and rage. And now he knew the truth. She'd been living better than he ever had, even before prison. He packed light. 1 suitcase with clothes for a week, his passport, the digital recorder, and enough cash to stay off credit card systems that could be traced. He told Miguel he was taking personal time to visit family, promised to be back before the end of the month. At Bush Intercontinental Airport, Khalil Washington bought a ticket to Cartagena with a connecting flight through Panama City. As the plane lifted off, he watched Houston disappear below him for the second time in his life. The first time, he'd been taken away in handcuffs. This time, he was choosing to leave. But he wasn't going to Colombia as the same trusting man who'd been framed 15 years earlier. Prison had taught him patience, planning, and the importance of controlling every variable. When he confronted Simone, he would be ready for anything she might say or do. What he couldn't prepare for was how seeing her again would make him feel, or what she might be willing to do to protect the life she'd built on the foundation of his destroyed one. Café Del Mar sat on a busy corner in Cartagena's historic district, the kind of place where tourists mixed with locals and conversations were lost in the noise of clinking glasses and street traffic. Khalil had been watching the restaurant for 3 days, learning the rhythm of lunch crowds and dinner rushes. He knew Simone came here every Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon. She always sat at the same table near the window, always ordered the same seafood salad and white wine. She would spend an hour reading on her phone, responding to messages, looking like any other wealthy expat, enjoying her afternoon routine. Tuesday, November 7th. Khalil walked into Café Del Mar, wearing khaki pants and a plain blue shirt, looking like another American tourist exploring the old city. He chose a table 3 spots away from Simone's usual spot and ordered coffee in broken Spanish. She arrived exactly on time, as Jerome Banks' surveillance had predicted. But seeing her in person, after 15 years of wondering if she was dead, hit Khalil like a physical blow. Her hair was longer now, darker, with streaks of silver that made her look sophisticated. She wore a yellow sundress and gold jewelry that probably cost more than his monthly salary. Simone looked healthy, rested, content, like a woman who'd never spent a day worrying about anything more serious than which restaurant to try for dinner. She sat down at her usual table, placed her designer purse on the chair beside her, and signaled the waiter with the easy confidence of someone who belonged. Khalil waited until she'd ordered her wine before he moved. He stood up slowly, walked over to her table, and sat down in the chair across from her without asking permission. For a moment, she didn't look up from her phone. Then she did. The wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the tile floor. Her face went white like she'd seen a ghost, which in a way she had. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned pale. "Khalil," she whispered, barely audible over the restaurant noise. Her voice was the same, just older, more careful, like she'd been practicing speaking without giving away secrets. "Hello, Mirabelle," he said, using her new name deliberately. "Or do you prefer Simone? I never know what to call dead people when they come back to life." She looked around the restaurant frantically, checking to see if anyone was watching them. The waiter was already sweeping up the broken glass, used to tourists who got clumsy with their drinks. "You're supposed to be in prison," she said, her voice still shaking. "How are you here? How did you find me?" "I got out. 15 years for a murder that never happened. Turns out the blood evidence was tampered with. Funny how that works when the victim isn't actually dead." Simone reached for her purse, probably looking for her phone or keys, or some way to escape. But Khalil reached across the table and placed his hand over hers, not roughly, but firmly enough to keep her in place. "We need to talk," he said. "About what you did to me. About what you stole from me. About the 15 years I spent in a cage while you lived like a queen." That's when Rome appeared. Khalil saw him approaching through the restaurant's front window, moving fast but trying not to draw attention. Even at 45, Rome looked dangerous, broader than he'd been in college, with the kind of confidence that came from having money and connections in a country where both could solve most problems. Rome walked straight to their table and stood behind Simone's chair, his hands resting on her shoulders in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "Khalil Washington," Rome said, like he was greeting an old friend instead of a man whose life he'd helped destroy. "Heard you got out. Thought you might come looking for answers." Khalil kept his voice level, controlled. The prison years had taught him how to stay calm when violence was close. "Jerome Baptiste. Still going by Rome, I see. Still stealing other men's wives." Rome's jaw tightened, but he didn't take the bait. Simone tried to stand up, but Rome's hands on her shoulders held her in place. The three of them formed a triangle of tension that other diners were starting to notice. "This doesn't have to be complicated," Rome said. "You want answers, we'll give you answers. You want money, we can talk about money. But causing a scene in public isn't good for anybody." Khalil pulled out his phone and set it on the table, making sure the voice recorder app was running. "I don't want your money. I want the truth. All of it. On the record." Simone looked at Rome, then back at Khalil. Tears were starting to form in her eyes, but whether they were from guilt or fear was impossible to tell. "I had no choice," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They were going to kill me. Rome owed people money, dangerous people. The only way out was to disappear completely. So you framed me for your murder," Khalil said. "You planted evidence, staged a crime scene. Let me rot in prison while you started a new life with him. I thought you'd get out sooner," she said, crying now. "I thought someone would figure it out, that the evidence wouldn't hold up. I never meant for it to go on so long." Rome shifted uncomfortably behind her, clearly wanting to end this conversation before it went any further. But Simone kept talking, like 15 years of secrets were pouring out of her all at once. The pregnancy was his, she said, nodding toward Rome. It was always his. We'd been seeing each other for months, before I disappeared. The baby you thought was yours, she was never yours. Khalil felt something break inside his chest. The child he'd mourned, the family he dreamed of building, none of it had ever been real. Simone had used his love for her and his desire for children as weapons against him. Amara is 15 now, Rome said, his voice warning Simone to stop talking. She's a good kid. Honor student, plays soccer, wants to be a doctor. She doesn't know anything about Houston or who he used to be. What about my life? Khalil asked. What about the 15 years you stole from me? What about my grandmother who died thinking I was a killer? Simone's tears were falling freely now, but Khalil felt no sympathy. He cried every night for the first 2 years in prison. He grieved for her, blamed himself, wondered what he could have done differently. All for a woman who'd been lying to him about everything. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. We were young and scared and stupid, and we made terrible choices. Sorry doesn't give me back 15 years, Khalil said. Sorry doesn't bring back my grandmother. Sorry doesn't fix what you did to my reputation, my life, my future. Rome checked his watch, clearly anxious to leave. Look, we've all said things that needed saying. Maybe it's time to move on. You got your answers. We got our lives here. Everybody walks away. But Khalil wasn't ready to walk away. He traveled 2,000 miles and waited 15 years for this moment. The recording on his phone captured every word, every admission, every detail of how they destroyed his life for their own convenience. The question now was what he planned to do with the truth he'd finally obtained. Khalil leaned back in his chair, studying the two people who had stolen 15 years of his life. The restaurant buzzed around them, oblivious to the life-changing conversation happening at table 12. Here's what's going to happen, Khalil said, his voice calm but final. You're going to record a video confession. Both of you. Admitting what you did, how you framed me, how you faked Simone's death. Then you're going to send it to the Houston Police Department, the district attorney's office, and every major news station in Texas. Simone shook her head immediately. I can't do that. Amara doesn't know about any of this. She thinks we're her real parents, that we met in college and moved here for business. If this comes out, it'll destroy her world. Should have thought about that before you destroyed mine, Khalil replied. You want to protect your daughter's feelings? I wanted to protect my life. Didn't stop you from taking it anyway. Rome's hands tightened on Simone's shoulders. You're being unreasonable, he said. We can't just confess to international crimes. There are extradition treaties, legal consequences. We have a business here, employees, people who depend on us. You had consequences too, Khalil said. When you decided to frame an innocent man for murder. When you let me sit in prison while you play house with my wife and raised a child I thought was mine. Simone was crying harder now, but Khalil felt nothing. Prison had taught him that tears were just another form of manipulation, and he'd seen enough of them to last a lifetime. There has to be another way, she said. Money, relocation assistance, something that doesn't involve destroying our daughter's life. She's 15, Khalil. She's innocent in all this. So was I, he said. Didn't stop you from letting me take the blame for your crimes. Rome stepped around the table, positioning himself closer to Khalil. His voice dropped to a whisper that only the three of them could hear. You need to be very careful here, he said. This isn't Houston. This is Colombia. People disappear here all the time, especially people who cause problems for the wrong families. I've built relationships over 15 years. Relationships with people who can make your problems permanent. Khalil smiled for the first time since sitting down. Are you threatening me, Rome? Because I spent 15 years learning patience from men who would eat you alive. I'm not afraid of you or your friends. You should be, Rome said. Because unlike you, I'm not bound by any moral code. I've done whatever it took to survive, to build this life, to protect my family, and I'll do whatever it takes to keep protecting them. Then you understand exactly how far I'm willing to go to get my life back, Khalil replied. Because unlike you, I don't have anything left to lose. The standoff continued for several long moments. Other restaurant patrons were starting to stare at their table, sensing the tension even if they couldn't hear the conversation. Simone finally broke the silence. What if we just confessed to you? Right here, right now. You have your recording. Isn't that enough? No, Khalil said. Because that recording means nothing if you can claim it was coerced or edited. I need an official confession that clears my name publicly. I need the world to know that Khalil Washington is innocent. But our daughter, Simone pleaded. She's never done anything wrong. Why should she pay for our mistakes? Why should I have paid for them? Khalil asked. Your daughter has had 15 years of a good life. Loving parents, opportunities. I had 15 years of hell because of choices you made. Now it's your turn to face consequences. Rome was getting more agitated, checking his phone, looking toward the restaurant's exits. We're not doing it, he said finally. You can threaten us all you want, but we're not destroying our family for your peace of mind. Khalil pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back. He slid it across the table to Simone. 48 hours, he said. That's how long you have to decide. Either you record the confession and send it to the authorities, or I do it for you. I'll contact every news outlet in the United States. Tell them exactly where to find Mirabel Santiago and Roman Bautista. I'll make sure your faces are on every television in America. You're bluffing, Rome said. You expose us. You expose yourself to criminal charges. Extortion, harassment may be worse. Maybe, Khalil said. But I've already lost everything once. Prison doesn't scare me anymore. Dying doesn't scare me anymore. The only thing that scares me is living the rest of my life knowing that the people who destroyed me are still out there, still free, still happy. He stood up from the table, leaving the business card between them. 48 hours, he repeated. Starting now. Khalil walked out of Café Del Mar without looking back. He didn't see Simone pocket the card with shaking hands. He didn't see Rome pull out his phone and start making calls to people whose names weren't in any public directory. What he also didn't see was the teenage girl sitting at a corner table near the restaurant's back entrance. Amara Bautista had skipped her last class to meet friends for coffee, but instead had witnessed her parents in what looked like the most intense conversation of their lives. She'd been too far away to hear most of what was said, but she'd caught fragments. Words like 15 years and confession and daughter. Most disturbing was what she'd heard her father say about people disappearing and her mother crying about protecting someone named Amara. That night, Amara confronted her parents at their dinner table in their gated community home. She'd spent hours thinking about what she'd witnessed, replaying the conversation fragments, trying to make sense of the fear she'd seen in her mother's eyes. Who was that man you were talking to today? She asked. And why were you both so scared of him? Simone and Rome exchanged glances across the table. They'd built their new life on the assumption that their past would stay buried, that their daughter would never have to know the truth about who they really were. It was just a business disagreement, Rome said. Nothing for you to worry about. But Amara was 15, not 5. She'd inherited her mother's intelligence and her father's instinct for reading people. And she knew when her parents were lying to her. I heard you talking about me, she said. About protecting me from something. What are you telling me? That question would haunt the family for the next 48 hours, as Rome made increasingly desperate phone calls, and Simone stared at Khalil's business card like it was a bomb waiting to explode. Because time was running out, and the choices they'd made 15 years earlier were finally catching up with them. 46 hours after Khalil's ultimatum, Simone made her choice. She called the number on his business card at 11:30 on Thursday night, her voice barely steady enough to speak. I'll do it, she said. I'll record the confession. But I need to see you first, alone. There are things about that night you don't understand. Things that Rome doesn't know I know. Khalil was sitting in his hotel room in Cartagena's tourist district, staring out at the Caribbean Sea. He'd spent 2 days wondering if they would call, if they would choose confession over consequence. What kind of things? He asked. Not over the phone, Simone said. Meet me tomorrow night at Playa Blanca, the beach past the resort area. There's a small cove about a mile south of the main tourist spot. I'll be there at 10 p.m. Why should I trust you? Khalil asked. You've lied to me about everything else. Because I'm tired of lying, she said. Because my daughter is asking questions I can't answer without destroying her world. Because 15 years is long enough to carry this guilt. The line went quiet for several seconds. When Simone spoke again, her voice was different, older, sadder, like the weight of 15 years had finally settled on her shoulders. "I never wanted it to go this far," she said. "I thought you'd be out in 5 years, maybe less. I thought the evidence would fall apart. I never imagined you'd serve the whole sentence. But you never tried to help me," Khalil said. "You never came forward, never contacted anyone, never tried to fix what you'd done." "I was scared," she admitted. "And the longer it went on, the more impossible it became to undo. How do you confess to destroying someone's life when confessing means destroying your own?" Friday night came with threatening clouds and a warm wind off the Caribbean. Khalil took a taxi to the main beach area, then walked south along the coastline until he found the cove Simone had described. It was isolated, rocky, the kind of place where conversations could happen without interruption. He arrived at 9:45 and waited. 10 o'clock came and went. Then 10:30. By 11, Khalil knew something was wrong. He walked back to the main beach and tried calling Simone's number. The call went straight to voicemail. He called again every 15 minutes until midnight, then gave up and returned to his hotel. Saturday morning brought news that would change everything. A fisherman found a body washed up on the rocks near Playa Blanca, about half a mile from where Khalil had been waiting. The woman had dark hair, was wearing a yellow dress, and carried no identification. Local police identified her as Mirabel Santiago through her fingerprints. Cause of death was blunt force trauma to the back of the head, consistent with falling and striking the rocky coastline. The initial investigation suggested an accident, possibly someone who had been walking along the beach after dark and slipped. But the medical examiner found details that didn't match the accident theory. The angle of the head injury suggested she'd been struck by something or someone, not by falling onto rocks. There were defensive wounds on her hands and arms, scratches that indicated she'd fought against an attacker. More suspicious was what investigators found in her car, parked at a shopping center 2 miles from the beach. Her purse was still inside, along with her phone, which showed the last call had been made to a Houston area code on Thursday night. Roman Bautista was questioned immediately, but his alibi was unshakable. Friday night had been his daughter's school play, where she was performing in a production of Romeo and Juliet. Rome had been in the auditorium from 7 p.m. until nearly 11, surrounded by dozens of other parents who could verify his presence. Security cameras at the school confirmed his arrival and departure times. His phone's GPS showed no movement from the school location during the time window when Simone was killed. Either he was innocent, or he'd planned the perfect alibi. The investigation quickly turned to the mysterious American who had been seen talking to Simone at Café Del Mar just days earlier. Hotel records showed that Eric Daniels had checked out of his room Friday morning, hours before Simone's estimated time of death. Airport security footage showed a man matching Khalil's description going through customs at Rafael Núñez International Airport Friday afternoon, but there was no record of him boarding any scheduled flights. His name didn't appear on passenger lists for any airline departing Cartagena that day. Immigration officials found that Eric Daniels had entered Colombia on a passport that led back to a social security number belonging to a man who had died in prison 3 years earlier. The identity was fake, professionally constructed, and now completely untraceable. Port authorities expanded their search to private boats, charter flights, and land crossings into Venezuela. But Khalil Washington, or whoever he really was, had vanished as completely as Simone had 15 years earlier. Rome told police that the American had been extorting his family, demanding money for crimes they'd supposedly committed in the United States. He painted Khalil as a dangerous ex-convict who had threatened their daughter and demanded payment to keep quiet about their past. But investigators found no evidence of extortion attempts, no demands for money, no threats against the family. What they did find was more puzzling. In Simone's hotel room safe, they discovered a digital recorder containing her full confession to framing Khalil Washington for murder. The recording was dated Friday afternoon, just hours before her death. In it, Simone detailed everything: the fake crime scene, the planted evidence, the years of deception. She named Rome as her accomplice and begged for forgiveness from the man whose life they destroyed. Colombian authorities forwarded the recording to Houston police, who reopened the Simone Washington case after 15 years. The confession cleared Khalil's name completely, but raised new questions about what had happened in Colombia and whether justice had been served or perverted. 3 weeks after Simone's death, Khalil Washington's settlement money was transferred out of his Houston bank account to an untraceable offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The transaction was authorized with passwords and security codes that only he would have known. But Khalil himself remained missing. No confirmed sightings, no credit card usage, no phone calls to friends or family in Houston. He had become a ghost, just like Simone had been for 15 years. The question that haunted investigators in both countries was simple but unanswerable. Had Khalil Washington finally gotten the justice he deserved, or had he become the killer that Simone and Rome had always claimed he was? 2 years later, the Mirabel Santiago murder case remains officially open in Colombian police files. Despite extensive investigation, no arrests have been made. No suspects have been formally identified. The case file grows thicker each month with dead-end leads and false sightings, but no closer to resolution. The physical evidence found at the scene painted a confusing picture. Investigators discovered torn wedding photographs scattered near where Simone's body was found. The photos showed a young couple on courthouse steps, clearly American, clearly in love. Half of each photo had been carefully torn away, leaving only the woman's face visible. DNA analysis of the photos revealed they'd been handled by at least 3 different people. Simone's fingerprints were on the torn edges. An unidentified male's prints were found on the corners. But the third set of prints belonged to someone not in any law enforcement database. Rome's official statement to police painted Simone as a woman consumed by guilt over crimes committed in her youth. He claimed she'd been depressed for months, talking about confessing to authorities, worried about their daughter discovering the truth about their past. According to Rome, Simone had been receiving threatening messages from someone claiming to know about Houston. She'd become paranoid, afraid to leave the house alone, convinced that their old life was catching up with them. He suggested she might have taken her own life, rather than face the consequences of her actions. But the medical examiner's report contradicted the suicide theory. The blunt force trauma that killed Simone came from behind, at an angle impossible to achieve through self-infliction. Someone had struck her with considerable force, then possibly pushed or thrown her body onto the rocks. Amara Bautista, now 17, knows the truth about her parentage and her parents' criminal past. The confession recording that cleared Khalil's name also destroyed the foundation of her world. She learned that her entire life had been built on lies, that the parents she trusted had framed an innocent man and stolen his freedom. She's been in therapy since her mother's death, struggling with questions that have no satisfying answers. How do you grieve for a mother who was also a criminal? How do you love a father who might be a killer? How do you build an identity when everything you believed about yourself was false? Rome has custody of his daughter, but their relationship remains strained. Amara knows he was involved in framing Khalil, knows he helped stage her mother's fake death, knows he built their comfortable life on someone else's destroyed one. Trust, once broken so completely, doesn't easily repair. As for Khalil Washington, he remains a ghost. In the 2 years since Simone's death, there have been unconfirmed sightings across South America. A mechanic in Venezuela who matched his description and paid only in cash. A construction worker in Ecuador who kept to himself and never gave his real name. The most credible sighting came from a bartender in a small coastal town in Peru. She swore she served drinks to a man who called himself Kevin Williams, but had Khalil's distinctive scar above his left eyebrow, a mark from a childhood accident that would be impossible to fake. But when Peruvian authorities investigated, Kevin Williams had already moved on. The apartment he'd rented was cleaned out. The job he'd worked had no record of his employment. The identity he'd used led nowhere. 3 theories have emerged about what really happened to Khalil Washington. The first theory suggests he's alive and free, living under a new identity somewhere in South America, where extradition treaties are weak and cash can buy anonymity. Supporters of this theory point to his prison education, his legal knowledge, and his 15 years of planning time as evidence that he could have orchestrated the perfect disappearance. The second theory is darker. Rome's connections to Colombian organized crime weren't just business relationships. They were partnerships built on mutual benefit and protection. When Khalil threatened to expose Rome's past, those partners might have intervened permanently. Khalil's body could be feeding fish in the Caribbean or buried in unmarked jungle graves. The third theory is the most troubling. Maybe Khalil didn't disappear after Simone's death. Maybe he orchestrated it. Maybe 15 years in prison had changed him from victim to predator, from innocent man to calculated killer. Maybe he got the confession he wanted, then made sure Simone could never recant or escape justice again. The truth is probably buried somewhere between these theories, in the gray area where justice and revenge become indistinguishable. Did Khalil Washington finally get the vindication he deserved? Or did he become the monster that Simone and Rome had painted him as 15 years earlier? The recording that cleared his name was found in Simone's hotel safe, but the original conversation at Café Del Mar was never recovered. Khalil's phone, which captured Simone's confession, vanished along with him. Without that evidence, questions remain about what was said, what was promised, what threats might have been made. What we know for certain is this: Simone Washington died on a Colombian beach, far from a Houston kitchen, where she'd faked her own death 15 years earlier. The man she'd framed for murder was finally free, his name cleared, his innocence established. But freedom came at a price that might have cost him his soul. This story doesn't end with justice served or mystery solved. It ends with the reminder that some wounds never heal, some truths come too late, and sometimes the price of clearing your name is losing everything else that makes you human. The truth beneath the lies may never be fully known. But one thing is certain: when love turns to betrayal, when trust becomes a weapon, when innocent people pay the price for other people's crimes, everyone loses something they can never get back. Even freedom, when it finally comes, might not be enough to make you whole again. What do you think happened to Khalil Washington? Do you believe he's living free somewhere in South America? Or did his quest for justice turn him into something he never meant to become? Was Simone's death an accident, suicide, or something more calculated? Drop your theories in the comments below. We read every single one and love hearing your perspectives on these complex cases where the line between victim and villain gets blurred beyond recognition. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button to help us reach more people who appreciate deep dive true crime content. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest investigations into cases that challenge everything you think you know about justice. Share this video with anyone who loves stories that don't have easy answers, because the most interesting cases are the ones that leave us with more questions than solutions. The ones that make us examine our own sense of right and wrong, our own capacity for forgiveness and revenge. We've got dozens more stories like this one waiting for you on our channel. Cases where the truth is stranger than fiction, where justice wears different faces, where love and hate dance so close together you can't tell them apart. Check out the end screen for our recommendations of similar cases that will leave you questioning everything. From wrongful convictions that took decades to overturn, to missing persons who turned up living new lives thousands of miles away, to families torn apart by secrets that should have stayed buried. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next investigation.